7 of the Real World Wellness Podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Christine Lehman, a certified nutritional therapist and the reverse diabetes coach, which is also the name of my website. I see clients in person and by Skype, and I want to let you know that I'm offering a special summer tune-up session at 20% off my regular price. So contact me on my website, again, reversediabetescoach.com, to schedule your session and ask me any questions. Please remember while you're listening to the show, advice and information we provide is intended to be helpful and informative, but is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment. Today is the 5th installment of the How to Have Healthy Hormones During Perimenopause series, and we can extend that to include menopause since today's speaker, Debra Atkinson, will address exercise and fitness after 50 as well. So I want to introduce Debra. She's a wellness coach and fitness expert who helps women approaching 50 or who've turned the corner on 50 get the vitality and energy they want in the second half of their life by eating more and exercising less. She is the author of You Still Got It Girl, the After 50 Fitness Formula for Women, and Navigating Fitness After 50, your GPS for choosing programs and professionals you can trust. Her forthcoming book, Hot Not Bothered, will be out in October. I love that title. Debra is host of the Flipping 50 TV show and the Flipping 50 podcast, as well as a frequent blogger at Huffington Post, ShareCare, and other outlets. She has 32 years of fitness industry experience and is an international fitness presenter and former university lecturer. She is a triathlete who now spends much of her time swimming in paperwork, writing the desk, and running the Flipping 50 coaching business. So welcome, Debra.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Great topic. We're going to dive in and have a ball, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I always am interested in people's journey. Can you tell me how you got interested in fitness and in particularly this age group of women after 50?
Well, okay, the dirt. All right. That's where you're going. But there are two separate stories. I mean, one is more of a fairy tale. I grew up, flirting with so many different things. I was always interested in art and, really loved animals. So I thought for a long time I was going to be a vet, or really my heart of hearts was to be Jane Goodall. And then I realized my idea of camping was the Marriott, and that was not going to be a good fit. So soon dumped that. And I actually did go to school to become a graphic designer. I was there for a couple of years, and back in the early 80s, everybody who was in art smoked and drank, and I did not. I had really just discovered fitness for the first time, self-initiated. I'd been involved in sports and active, but by no means an all-star, high school stud. I was there for the social life, and my friends were there, and I was just getting into walking. I started that with my mom, and became jogging, it became running, and I realized I felt something. I felt a way about myself that I had never felt before. And, as I began to doubt art, I began to feel more confident in physical education. And so I kind of had one foot on each side of the fence for about a semester and had some wonderful instructors. And I got to the point where I want to make other people feel this feeling. Not just for the fit, the physical, the vanity, the aesthetics. And if that's what motivates you, there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But for the what else it does for your life, making you a better parent, a better mother, a better employee, a better boss, a better everything starts with fitness and health. And so that's how it all started. My journey into narrowing it down after 30 years was a midlife crisis. Literally was. I had about 8 major life changes in about 14 months and moved 2 states away before my house was under contract. My youngest kid went off to school, and I decided he's getting a life, I better get one. And I bailed from safety and security. I was loving my career, but I just felt like I was meant to do more, and I wanted to reach a bigger audience, a bigger target. And I kept hearing from the generation of women in their 40s and 50s and beyond that they weren't being heard, that they couldn't find enough choices, and that, they weren't dead yet. They weren't geriatric. They weren't senior and didn't associate with that word. And yet, when hormones started changing the game, they weren't getting help changing their strategy to win. So that's when I began narrowing it down. Selfishly, like we do, we sometimes change because we're there, and I was 49. So I went through some changes and realized, the science is different. What it takes is so different than what we grew up learning it was. So I narrowed it down, and I love these women, and I love giving them back their lives or empowering them to feel like they're just starting. They're not done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds somewhat complex because you're talking about some of the mindset. You're talking about the physical as well, and also I would think the emotional. So is it fair to say you're taking a holistic approach here?
Yeah, I love that. You're so intuitive, but that's exactly it. I have an exercise and sport psychology background. For that reason, I went back to do a master's because I did not think we had any problem really with our physiology or kinesiology. It was that we weren't helping people change and have stick. And we now know, I'm sure you abide by this, the mind and the body and the spirit, we can't separate them anymore. We know it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I have my podcast is very broad, and I have even had a Buddhist monk on, and So when you were approaching 50, what was running through your mind?
Nothing like that. I was because I made all of these changes at 49, I kept thinking, I'm immune to this, but, I wasn't. So no matter what, you're not having the hot flashes, you're not having the night sweats. At 49, we know something's changing under the hood. So I had lots and lots of stress, and it was my life, not my hormones, that made me change what I was doing. But I began from being an endurance athlete to, being behind the seats of a laptop, working on the screen, taking my entire, career digital, and, diving into really a realm I did not know very much about to take that message out there. I was exercising maybe 20 minutes a day. I had urgency. I had a kid in college. I had said, no, I don't want insurance. No, I don't want any perks. Don't pay my cell phone. Don't give me flexibility. I had a great life, and I gave it all up to have a better one. But you go backwards first. And so I wouldn't let myself, have very much time away from what I was doing. And what I realized is after 14 months, 20 minutes to 60 maybe a day, and usually not in one shot. It was maybe 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at another time, that I was in as good a shape, but actually felt better. My body weight, my percent body fat, as when I was training for 5 Ironman distance triathlons.
So what did that say to you?
That said to me exactly what science is telling us about the effect of exercise on our bodies. It's stress. Even a positive amount of exercise is stress. Let's face it, your body would rather lie on the couch. So when you make it get up, you make it work harder, breathe harder, lift more, it's stress. And we sometimes negate that. And some of us, as women, we use exercise as the way to negate our stress. We kind of like that. And there is that sweet spot, and we've all got to find it for ourselves. It's not the same. You may need, an hour long walk, and I may need 20 minutes of interval training for each of us to feel best. So there's a little bit of experimentation that has to go on for any of us. But the general rule of thumb is, cortisol is least negatively impacted by short bouts of interval training and by things like gardening or hiking, low-level activity that maybe lasts for longer duration, walking on the golf course. Those kinds of things, many of them I just mentioned, outdoors, being the better place to do it. But that's so much better for your cortisol level. And, that's really the big one. We talk a lot about the sex hormones going through menopause, but that's what gets our attention. Cortisol and insulin are always there, no matter how old we are. And they just become amplified because the others start going into imbalance or dropping levels.
So is high intensity interval training aerobic or anaerobic?
Called anaerobic because you're actually breathing harder. Okay. So you're, if we give you my infamous 0 to 10 scale, 0 is, lying down on the couch, 10 is vomiting. We try not to get there, but you want to know you're working hard during a work interval, so you're at an 8 or a 9. And then on your recovery interval, you're back down to a 2 or 3 or 4, really, really easy. So it's back and forth between those. Aerobic is that point where your breathing is steady. And actually those other activities are varying levels of aerobic. So walking on the golf course is aerobic. Walking and hiking is aerobic. You're working harder, breathing harder than if you're sitting on a couch, but you can talk really easily, and you stop because you're done, not because you're exhausted or breathless.
Oh, that makes sense. So I personally have tried the interval training, just running and then slowing down in bursts of like 4 or 5 minutes. But to be honest, I find that it doesn't really, that I don't enjoy it that much, and so I end up jogging.
Yeah, that's a key. Yeah, exactly. And that right there is probably the key to our whole show. The joy and the motion is so important.
Yes, and I think another guest on my podcast talked about, she was the motivation, and she's a motivation researcher at the University of Michigan around fitness. And so it sort of seems intuitive, frankly, but that was the whole positive reinforcement. And I brought up, it's important to enjoy, I think, what your activity is. So what do you think?
That's absolutely right. That tends to be the biggest mistake that most people make with exercise. When they're deciding to do it, it's because too often of how many calories does that burn? Or what's the exercise that will burn the most fat? And typically, that's not a great match with something that you look forward to doing. So, that's the key, is not just wanting the result and the outcome, but actually engaging in and having a good time on the journey.
Absolutely. So what are some of your favorite types of movement or exercise?
There are not too many things I don't like. I don't like that there's only 24 hours in a day to do them. So I like to run, like to swim, like to bike, and you put those 2 to 3 together, and that's a triathlon. Love yoga, and love weight training. That's probably my core meal, if you will. Most times I'm rotating some of those activities, and the reason I rotate is because of the very balanced body that all of those give. There's some corrective type of exercise in there to fight off imbalances and asymmetries that we all have that can lead to an injury if they're left alone to grow and get worse. And you swim, and it can be recovery or work, but it's much softer on joints. Emphasizes lower body, while you're running, but upper body while you're swimming. Biking is a lot softer, easier impact as well. So all of those things collectively are things that mean, knock on wood, I'll be able to do them for a lot longer. in my lifetime.
Right. Because it sounds like they're easier on your joints, for one thing. Is that true?
Right. The swimming and the biking certainly are. The running is not. So those people, unfortunately, who only have that passion for running often get booted out, due to an injury. And it's sometimes then, that's nature's way of leading you to another activity. But the sooner you start to cross-train and do other things, the longer you'll be able to be a runner.
That makes sense, and that's actually what I do. I kind of got the impression that variety is a good thing.
Variety is a great thing. I think it's, most of us probably do have a favorite. It's like going to a restaurant. If you have a favorite restaurant, quite often we also have the favorite thing we order at that restaurant. Every once in a while, it's nice to color outside the lines, but lots of times we like to come back to that old friend. And, I think it is nice to start doing something you love, whether it's because maybe you're a group exercise person and you love the music and that's what speaks to your heart. For me, running is, it's time when I can let my mind think and I think marinate. You're a writer, you might appreciate this, but I think a lot of writers run or runners write. I'm not sure ever which comes first, but a lot of good things happen out there that don't happen sitting at a desk. So,
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I actually jog more than I run, but
well, yes. Well, maybe I'm flattering myself when I say run. I'm probably right there with you.
But also being out in nature, it's that combination. I'm not a gym rat. I really enjoy, I'm near the water, going on a trail by the waterfront, and being out in nature is a big part of it for me.
Yeah, but there's so much talk now about grounding and forest bathing, especially for those of us, and who's not included in this, who are in front of technology so much, and how much of that helps us by exposure to negative ions, just get back in touch with ourselves and breathe clean air.
Absolutely. So do you also lift weights, and do you recommend that women do that?
I'm sorry, you cut out just a little bit.
Sure.
Would you repeat that?
Do you also lift weights, and do you recommend weightlifting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I recommend that as the number one priority for any female, any age. Probably the younger the better. Because if you're just starting when you're 50 or you're 60 or you're 70 or 80 or 90 for that matter, you're a little bit more intimidated by the entire thing than if you have body confidence and a little more attitude potentially in your 20s or 30s. So I highly recommend, if you're influencing somebody younger and you're not, in your 20s and 30s, that you recommend they do. But here's why. It is, yes, a lot of things about bone density. It's about body composition. And we can talk specifics about the amount of muscle mass that we lose starting at age 30. But we can talk too about bone density losses that happen at about the same time. But what's really the immediate gratification is the empowering piece of it. Whereas physical exercise that is more aerobic or anaerobic, whether you're going for an easy, slow jog or you're doing intervals up and down hills or on inclines on a treadmill, those are a little harder on your body and they beat you up. Sometimes they can actually be detrimental for posture. But when you're strength training correctly, you're actually helping yourself realign your framework. You're opening up your body in places where it needs to be open, strengthening it, and pulling it together in places where it needs to be brought together. It's really game-changing, life-changing for a lot of women.
Wow. I didn't realize it had such a great impact. And I admit that's the thing that tends to fall by the wayside. I know I should be doing it more often. I have a set of weights at home. And I've taken enough classes over the years at different gyms that I have my own routine. But,
Yeah.
It's all I can do to kind of keep everything going, including I enjoy walks, brisk walks too. So I try to get in at least 20-minute walks a day, plus, playing tennis and whatever else I can do. But so weightlifting for me, the weights are literally sitting there. And I keep looking at them.
Let me give you a little motivation, all right? Okay. So starting at the age of 25, we peak in our muscle mass, and it's the same for men and women. That's where, we look pretty good no matter what we do. We're probably having an easier time maintaining our weight than we ever did. And if we are not resistance training, and by that I mean specifically lifting weights, strength training, and reaching fatigue, we can define that too, if you like. We lose on average, none of us is average, but on average we lose half a pound of muscle a year. So if you're 50, do the math. Mm-hmm. You've lost quite a bit. And if you're 60 and 70 and, continue that way, having not lifted weights, you're losing that lean muscle mass. So you might be a 50-year-old who can get on the scale and say, I'm only 2 pounds more than my high school weight, or, I weigh the same as when I was 30. But if you're not resistance training, chances are that's not the same kind of weight. You've lost a lean muscle or that lean muscle tissue and increased your body fat percentage simply by default. Mm-hmm. So that becomes risky for disease reasons, but it's also, most likely changing the size of clothes you wear. They're not going to fit the same. And, it's not boding well for the future when it becomes even less about what you look like or the size of clothes in your closet and becomes more about, do you have the strength to prevent falls? Do you have the strength for balance? Do you have the strength to, be as active as you want to when we finally get to that retirement period of time where we've got all these great plans?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point. And I have 2 follow-up questions. One is, you mentioned, if you don't mind defining fatigue, since I think technique is very important.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought me back to that. So there is a difference between fatigue and tired. And what I find is we've got so many things like boot camp, out there, or where you'll go to aerobic classes that are very fast paced, very fast moving. You'll all probably recognize burpee, as an exercise that's commonly done. Do X amount of them. You will get breathless. There's no arguing that. I have a little challenge with creativity on that and whether it's great for everybody. Some people may find it a wonderful move. However, we're doing a lot of forward flexion, coming down, we get tired. But doing 30 of those, you could get tired. However, if you're not reaching muscle fatigue when you're doing resistance training, we're not going to get the overload that brings what is overcompensation. And fitness actually happens between exercise sessions, not while we're exercising. Exercise provides the potential for fitness, but it's during the rest and recovery period between exercise where we get fit, provided we have either reached fatigue during strength training to temporary muscle fatigue where we're beginning to lose form. We feel like we're cheating, or our body begins to use momentum in other places. We all, I think, can identify with, I just can't really do one more well, and I know I'm there. That's temporary fatigue, and really, no matter how old you are, you've got to get there in order to have your body super compensate, because what that smart body we live in does is it doesn't just adapt and recover so you can exercise again. It actually hyper adapts because it's always trying to protect you. So it will get stronger, or it will have more endurance in a cardiovascular kind of situation where you're running a little bit more than you have before. You'll get more endurance when you rest and recover before your next workout.
Okay. And then I was wondering about osteoporosis, osteopenia, which is the loss of bone density, mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that one, well, I was diagnosed I'm on the cusp of it. And I'm addressing it with a multi-pronged approach, but I wanted to hear your thoughts about both, because I've always been physically active. Now I have fallen down a little bit on the strength training, but anyway, I won't get into the discussion on calcium sources here because that's another conversation, but I've switched that up to a better one. And but I wanted just to ask you what you recommend for women, both in the prevention, which we may have addressed, but also on how they can reverse it to, with a combination, I think, of the right food sources as well as the weight-bearing exercise.
Yeah, okay, great discussion. So, ironically, I just did it. This is such a big topic, and it's actually confusing to a lot of people, so I'm so glad you asked. I just did a live Facebook post on this, so for anybody who wants to go dig that out at facebook.com/flipping50TV is the URL. It's the Flipping 50 page. In the videos, you'll find it. But there is a very different protocol for prevention than there is for once you know you're diagnosed or you know that you have lots of risk factors and you are at high risk, what you would do. And, whether you actually are preventing or not. But reversing is very challenging. So once that door is closed, once you've gone through menopause, you're probably not going to reverse osteoporosis. You're going to slow losses, but we are losing. So you are withdrawing from the bank right now, everybody, period. We start at about age 30. So a lot of things happen at 30, right? When you get to that birthday, you should really say, okay, assess my exercise program here. But we lose 1 to 3% of our bone mass a year starting at age 30. On average. So if you're resistance training, you're better off. But that points to, we're going to live potentially to 90 or 100, or we could live to 120. Do the math, right? That's a lot of loss to happen over time. So we need to slow those losses or prevent them or stop them from happening ever in the first place while we can. The 1 to 3%, so let's say we're lucky and we only lose 1%. By the time you're 80, you've lost 50% of your bone mass because you just have so much in the bank and you're withdrawing. So the goal is the winner gets the most bone density into their account by 30. And we do that actually starting in adolescence because our best bone density gap happens before we actually start menstruation for females or reach puberty, basically for boys and girls, both. So doing things as kids that build bone density, things that are, jump rope and running and gymnastics versus swimming. So we know there are increased accidents, right, and risk that comes with gymnastics, but studies looking at gymnasts versus swimmers, there are far greater bone density scans done on gymnastics, people who participated in that, than were swimmers. So lots of great activity for other physical reasons is not necessarily great for your bone density. We work the muscles a little bit, they pull on the bone. That certainly helps, but what it helps most with is just that you're more agile, you have better reaction skills, you're going to be less likely to fall. It's not actually increasing your bone density. So the goal would be, let's not fall in the first place.
Right.
So the prevention really happens when we're super young Did you want to jump in and ask a question?
I just wanted to clarify. You mentioned more bone density scans done in gymnasts and swimmers, but were those scans showing that they had better bone density? Is that what you meant?
That is exactly what I meant. Yes,
Okay.
thanks for clarification. The scans showed gymnasts clearly have a significantly higher bone density than swimmers do. When you're swimming, you've removed even the effects of gravity. So you have even less bone density support in the water or on a bike or on a rowing machine than you do when anything is striking the ground.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
And that's synonymous with, is that the synonymous with the weight bearing? Is that what they mean?
It is, although weight bearing can be really tricky. So weight bearing is a lot of things. So I'm standing still and weight bearing, but it's not really helping my bone density. So if I walk, that heel strike has a little bit more bone density if we're just on a continuum. If I were to jump in place, that has much more. So weight bearing exercise kind of has its levels as well. So for an older adult who's just getting started, coming off the couch, they may see a little increase in the bone density building benefit from starting a walking program. But they will reach a top stop. They will reach a threshold where that's not going to help them anymore once they're used to walking. Taking 10,000 steps after you're used to walking does not help your bone density. It has to be more stress, not more repetitions of the same stress. We call it a minimal effective stress, MES. So more is not counting. That means if you're picking up a 2-pound dumbbell and you lift it 50 times instead of 10, you don't get more benefit. You have to pick up the 20 or the 30 or something heavier to have more bone density impact. The line is about fatiguing at 10 repetitions. That's associated with 80% of a 1 rep max. We would never test anybody like that, especially someone we thought was low on bone density. But the association is about there. So if you can fatigue at 10 or fewer repetitions, you have the optimal opportunity to slow bone loss. If you're beyond 30 and definitely beyond 50, you're probably not going to increase your bone density very much at all. You may be able to do more before menopause than you can after it. But at that point, you're just trying to slow those losses and put the brakes on. But some of the significant changes you can see, if you're losing, let's say, 3% a year during menopause, and you're deciding, okay, I'm going to do everything I can within my ability. I'm going to increase my dietary intake of calcium, and I'm going to stop doing things that, overdoing caffeine or alcohol within your power to stop those drainers of calcium, and you're going to do strength training. You may see a slight increase of, say, maybe 1%, and that difference of 4% is extremely significant. So very worth it. It may feel like that's not very much, but if you look at the difference between what you would have lost having not done that, it's very big. So definitely within your power to do more things. And then the most important thing, in addition to slowing the loss, is balancing. So the low bone density lends itself to fracture if you fall. So the goal is, let's not fall. So we need to be working on balance no matter what and prevent the fall from happening in the first place.
Yeah, that's very, very important. And you may laugh at this, but I actually broke my left wrist in January ice skating. Not because I didn't know how to ice skate, because I wouldn't have done it, but because I had to rent my skates. They were huge men's hockey skates, and I kept kind of relacing them. But I think at the end, so after I'm pretty much done with the ice skating, I'm just standing still, looking around for my niece, whom I had kind of done this for, and wobbled, and that's when I fell. So it was like, and then of course, like, I know ice is the enemy, and then, so anyway, that was a whole nother experience. But so the little inside joke now is no ice skating. We'll go swimming or do something else.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's and then the X-rays, the notes from the doctors were, of course, osteopenia, which I already knew. That wasn't news to me. It just kind of brought it home and kind of pushed me to get a DEXA scan done again, and then to kind of tweak my routine as well. So anyway, that was I think I'm done with falling for a while, but it does.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and in fact, that I'm fortunate. That was the first time I'd broken anything in my entire, like, since I was in high school, and I broke a toe, doing sparring in Taekwondo. So anyway,
wow.
It doesn't. I think, staying in shape is. I mean, I value. It's one of my values, and so I am going to. You did motivate me to start weightlifting.
Good. All right. So now we just need to set up an accountability call, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's, I have tons of friends with Fitbits, so I appreciate what you shared about that too, because they are always doing those 10,000 steps. It's like a daily thing, and that's their goal.
And it's a great thing. It's great for other things, and I love the self-competition. I think if you got 10,000 yesterday, I've got to get them today. The activity level that it inspires is amazing, and I don't want to throw any of those activities under the bus. Rowing and swimming and biking are wonderful for your heart, but you have to, I think, make a priority list and say, what are my goals? What do I need to do or want to do with my fitness? And if bone density is one of them, then you absolutely must do strength training, and make sure you've got that in there as top of the list. And the other things can be there too and have a place, but you want to look at how well matched is what I'm doing to what I need.
Right, and then the other issue is frequency, right? And it's all over the place. I mean, the CDC has their, 5 30-minute, basically 150 minutes a day, and they do recommend strength training as well. And you can divide up that 150 minutes in different ways. You can do, an hour 3 times a week or something along those lines, or whatever, or chunk it down into 30 minutes. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
What I think now, in 2017, you mentioned CDC. There's American Heart Association. There's, the Bible for fitness instructors, professionals has always been the American College of Sports Medicine, writing position statements suggesting what we need to do. But in 2017, I think we've gotten here with nutrition. And we need to get here with fitness, that, we're each as unique as our thumbprint. And, yes, there is research tied to, the outcome if you're doing, say, 3 to 5 times a week of cardiovascular activity, or you're doing 2 or 3 times a week of strength training, and you're doing mobility or flexibility work most days of the week. But when we take people who might be inactive or unable to meet those, the alternative we give them is nothing, because they can't do it all. And I think that's a terrible option. So I'm for eliminating it. And where I start with clients, privately and in groups, is where are you now? What are you doing? And what do we want and need for your best health outcome? Where is it that you want to be, and what do you want to prevent? And then we start taking steps forward, fitting in the exercise to the time that they'll do. So, there are days when, fitness professionals are often seen. I'm sure for you, nutrition, it's people think that your dietary daily intake is just like stellar and supreme, but maybe that's not true, maybe it is. But for fitness professionals, the connotation is always that we must just be exercising all day. So it's so easy for us. But that can be further from the truth. We all are spending more time behind a computer now than we ever did to do our business, no matter what we're doing. And we watch a lot of people get fit, but as pros, we also have to fit it in. So some days I have to take 10 minutes, or 20 minutes and make that work. That's all I've got. So you can do a full body workout that will prevent bone density losses, or that will gain strength or improve posture in 10 minutes, twice a week. So it's about the quality. It is not about quantity anymore.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. I think that's a very good point. And I also do the same thing with my clients. And I'm just in terms of getting them moving.
Yes, right.
And what I call the incremental approach. Because often I have clients who are very obese. And and who are starting out, which kind of leads nicely into my next question. For people who've been sedentary a long time, what are there specific types of exercise? Do you agree? For them, would you start out more the low impact? What would you suggest for people in that group?
Definitely, it becomes the question of, we talked about earlier, what do you like? When you did, if you did exercise in the past, what did you like? Or what inspires you? What do you have easy access to? Convenience is sometimes a big one.
Right.
So, and, lots of times intimidation is a big reason people aren't exercising right now. So, I would never ask somebody I want you to go join a gym because you need the machine weights in order to be safe. That might be what I'm thinking, but for some people, I just know that's not a good fit. They're not going to use it. They're not going to go in the door. So we work on, first of all, what appeals to you? Would you rather exercise alone or in a group, to music, in quiet? And, are you more drawn to walking or biking? What do you have access to? Those questions really come into play first. So, I don't necessarily dictate that, but for someone who is starting, it definitely makes sense. That is a lower impact activity. So walking is often the easiest thing, and the first level is developing a habit. It may become something else. My hope as a fitness professional is always that someone will be codependent. By the time they're done, that they will like the activity so much they won't want to stop, that they will miss the days or feel not as good on the days they don't do it, such that they miss it. That's where I want them to be, and I'm very open about that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. The benefits that people get from it. I find that to be positive reinforcement. Yeah, totally agree. And you want them to get to the point where, I want to do this because I not only feel better afterward, which often happens right away, if they can self-select their own intensity. That's a key. We often want to impose it when somebody, a scenario that often happens when someone will, say, join a fitness center or get a personal trainer who's well-intentioned, but who is mostly fearful that they'll lose the client if they don't show them results right away. They may test them. They may say, okay, here's where I want your heart rate, here's where I want this, and they're working them so hard in order to get them with the weight loss or the fat loss that, they're uncomfortable. And there are a lot of studies that show with someone who's really overweight or what we call obese that, they have to self-select, that they otherwise don't get endorphins. They don't get the feel-good hormones many of the rest of us might get. So it's got to be totally self-selection for them in order to get the repeat. Yes. That makes a lot of sense. So for the recreational exerciser, do you have them kind of review or do some kind of journal?
Of their current activity level?
Yes,
Or
yes.
clarify a little bit for me.
Yes. Just their current activity level and their habits. I have a log where I ask my clients to track their food and
Right.
beverages,
Yep.
and I added a column for exercise, and some are better filling it out than others.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I have we call it the nap log. It's nutrition, it is their activity level, and it's their pillow time. So they're all important to me. So before I talk to somebody, I have them fill out 3 days of, what was their nutrition intake, the time they took it in, their activity level, what time, what type, how they felt, and their pillow talk, what time they went to bed, what time they woke up, how they felt in the morning, how they slept, all of that. Crucially important. And then there's a reason someone is talking to me. So it's, there's a gap between where they are now and where they want to go. So by first reviewing that and then taking into account where they are feeling now, what they're experiencing and what they want, then it's easier to close the gap. So I never give somebody here's the ideal. Here's the ideal day. This is the ideal weekly workout. We start with where they're at, and say, okay, based on what you're telling me, our highest priority is X. Here's the first few changes I'd recommend. Which one are you willing to do?
So I have a client who built a gym in her basement. And what I'm noticing is she's not spending much time down there.
I see.
And I kind of reminded her very gently about this the other day, because as we know, for weight loss, and this is one of her big goals, because she's doing fairly well on the diabetes front, but it's a multi-pronged approach, and she's doing fairly well with her diet, but she still has a way to go here. So anyway, what I'm noticing from her log is and that's fine, she seems to prefer walking. So she put on today that she had walked a mile, and that's great. I think that's great. But so what would you recommend for someone who, I think she enjoys to some extent the treadmill. She's got a treadmill down there, I think, and perhaps an elliptical. But I agree. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. It may be seasonal for her. While it's nice out, she may prefer to be outdoors. I'm going to probe this a little bit further when I talk to her. But this kind of goes back to, if you don't enjoy it, don't build a gym, right?
Right. So what does she say when you ask, you have a goal, and exercise is a part of it, this is what you committed to, what's making you avoid it?
Right, and she owns her own business. She's a real estate licensed realtor, plus she runs what's going to be probably a franchise, but right now, so her running her business tends to take over. We've talked a lot about making time for things and working in just small segments of time. So like most people, she can do it early in the morning before she starts her work day. So we've talked about trying to make the gym a little more a pleasant, experience, having her roommate or partner go with her just to kind of jumpstart it, watching TV, having just setting things up the night before. But I've just noticed it hasn't really happened yet. And, I'm okay with her walking. I just was curious about, whether it's, how you might address something like that, or would you just leave it alone?
No, I would never leave it alone, but I would bluntly ask her to, what are the answers? She has them. So that would be, I would say, do you want to still pursue this? Is weight loss still a goal? Do you realize that exercise is an important part of that. How do you want me to support you? So I would ask her the questions and let her call the answers. As far as progression, from the exercise, maybe once you come to, the conclusion that you thought maybe it's that she'd rather be outdoors versus, downstairs doing that, when you figure that out, then it would be, setting some mini goals. I do a couple of things for motivation with somebody, and maybe we've been up to too much with different clients. So when they've said, I'm going to exercise 5 times between now and next week, and if they didn't get that done last week, my question is always, why would they do that? I would say, how about we do 3? I want you only to do 3. And I'm holding them back. And then, they may come back and they actually do 4. They're like, I know you said just do 3, but I did 4. It's all self-initiated, and it can change the game. But I also do a motivation thing where, I ask them to, okay, are you okay with that? You're good with this goal. Let's do this. So I want you to pick a charity, and let's make it hurt if you don't do it. So if you miss any one of those things, choose a dollar amount. A single dollar does not do it. $5, $10, depending on the person. If you miss one you said you were going to get, you have to put $5 in for the charity. So at the end of the month, somebody's going to win. It may not be you, but somebody's going to win something good. And on the flip side, pick a reward. Ideally, something that pays you back, and motivates your exercise. Maybe it's new tunes on your iPad, or it's new shoes, or it's something fun to wear while you work out that you feel good in. But you get to put something in that kitty as well. So you either have the payout, or you get paid when you comply or don't. That kind of is like keeping score, and that can be fun, and it makes people find a way to fit it in.
Yeah, we've actually talked about some of these, and clothes for her was something, but it hasn't quite caught on. So it's the carrot and the stick, right? So I may have to try the stick a little bit, but I think just exploring this a little bit more with her would be good, because I know she wants to, she wants to make progress, but I'm trying to figure out what's holding her back, as well.
Ask her.
Yeah.
Ask her.
Yeah.
She knows. Maybe she's just despising doing it. Maybe she does not feel good while she's doing it. Maybe, the warm-up she's doing is not long enough. So she's getting into it and she feels too breathless, too fast. The warm-up and the cool-down are 2 things that we so often may have been skipping, earlier in our life to get to it because we're in such a big hurry. But there are things that do 2 things for us, more than 2. But the warm-up actually helps you burn more fat, use more energy while you're exercising, because it begins to increase your circulation, so you're using more oxygen. And 2, keeps you more comfortable while you're doing it. And so your perception of the difficulty of the exercise, even at the same intensity, will be lower, which is wonderful, right? And the cool down, on the other hand, does the opposite and prevents you from becoming sore later, helps you recover, so you're actually ready for that next workout.
Now, do you recommend that people stretch even if they're going to walk? I usually try and do some stretching first thing in the morning.
How first thing?
I mean, literally when I get up, I tend to get stiff overnight anyway. So I do some I've learned a lot of different yoga and Pilates, but I just do some gentle side to side, overhead bending, to get the hip flexors kind of loosened up a little bit, and stretches for my calves and my feet. I just do it in little circles to kind of warm up the spine a little bit too.
Yeah. And I love those, warming up the ankles, the feet. Ankles are a place where we lose mobility. I would caution you against doing anything where you're flexing, extending, rotating, or twisting your spine for an hour after you rise. So your discs plump overnight. And it may be part of what contributes to stiffness when you wake up in your spinal column, at least, because that plumpness, you've been lying horizontal, so haven't had the effects of gravity on your spine. But those plumped up discs are susceptible to pressure, more pressure on your spine because it's happening between the vertebrae, making us, more susceptible to slipped disc, ruptured discs with anything. So we're talking walking vigorously, running, core work, rotation, bending, lifting, yoga, waiting about an hour. 90% of that extra fluid that's in our disc space dissipates. And so it's much safer for us to exercise about an hour after we rise than doing it first thing. And I know I was just a buzzkill for all of you who are motivated. You're getting up early in the morning
That's
and
right.
exercising
Getting that
and being so diligent. And I was so sorry. But the challenge is we can't feel the injury until we actually have it. We can't feel that we're doing damage. But it's there. We know it's there. And so the more thick your spine is, the more you're at risk. And, again, who knows that unless they've had an x-ray because they've already been injured. So it's best to err on the cautious side if you can.
Well, this is fascinating. Do you want to address the protein before we close out?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So this one I know is it's a can of worms. It's a little controversial, but here's what researchers since about 2008 will say about protein needs as we're aging. In particular, they're actually growing. They're not shrinking, and for many of us, it's very, very counterintuitive. We would think that the less active you are, the less protein you need. The opposite is actually true. So I'm 53 and very active. You've heard of, I did 5 Ironman, in my 40s. My mom is 91. Her protein need, because she is much more sedentary than I. She's been losing lean muscle mass since she was 25. She doesn't lift weights. She needs more protein than I do on a daily basis because she does not synthesize the protein from her diet as well as someone who is active. So that we need to take into consideration. And in your levels of athleticism, if you're extremely athlete or active, you synthesize your protein better. So you can get by with a lower range. And ideally, just for user friendliness, what researchers say is, not a percent of your day, because it doesn't work like that. We have a capacity to utilize an amount of protein at a time. Specifically, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's about 20 to 30 grams of high-quality protein in each meal. So I may be able to get by with 20 grams of protein and still be able to repair, rebuild my muscle, retain it, and maybe grow some if I am strength training with that purpose. But my mother is going to need 30 grams. She's going to need that upper level because she just isn't there, and she's sitting losing more muscle mass more than she's not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a tough one though, right? So counterintuitive. It's not what we default to.
So, as far as just preventing injuries as we age, is there any advice that you have, just start out, for example, starting out gradually? Is there anything, other tips that you have for people?
as, starting out gradually, I would start with something that you see yourself being able to do for a lifetime. A temporary 4-week program, 8-week program that is, way too intense, that you never could see yourself doing forever. It would be the same as, doing a temporary diet. You can't see yourself doing forever. If there's an exit ramp, it's not your best friend, because it may actually put your body into more stress than it needs in order to get fit. So start with, what do you see yourself doing and enjoying for a long time? And the frequency and duration, that also makes sense to you based on your condition, your status. If you've been very sedentary versus you're already moderately active, there are different levels that you need to take into account. But I would encourage everyone to get breathless, several times a week, to move more all day. In a way we call it NEAT, non-exercise activity time. So we talk a lot about exercise, and as a fitness professional, that's what people ask me. What about this exercise or that, or how can I get rid of this or build more of that? But we forget that, 100 years ago, we didn't have to quote-unquote exercise because our days were active. So we may sit behind a desk, but remember, just 5 minutes of getting up every hour, walk down the hall, go get a drink, go deliver the verbal message, don't email it, and walk at lunch, even small bits, do some movement before you go to work, do some after your work day is done. And if you're feeding yourself and sleeping well, you're feeding into that activity level or the desire to. When you feel better and more energetic because you've slept well and you're eating well, you're going to be more likely to move. So if those need addressing, sometimes that's the first step before the exercise, so that you've got the energy there in the bank anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to thank you so much, Debra, for being on the Real World Wellness Podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great fun to talk to you.
Oh, wonderful. And listeners, you can find her at flipping50.com, where she also blogs, has her TV show, books, and other resources. I wanted to ask you, are your books on Amazon, or is your website the best place to go, or either or?
Either or, but definitely I cannot beat Amazon shipping, so I'll just put that out there.
Yes, for people with Prime memberships too.
Yep, exactly.
So the next episode, I will be talking about polycystic ovarian syndrome during and after perimenopause. So thanks everyone for listening, and have a great, healthy week.